I apologize for the technical difficulties. We're back live here on the JD Sports Show on 12 Ounce Sports Network, the Zingo TV app. Apologize for the technical difficulties. I guess 2020 had to strike me down as well, like they did with with baseball, as we're discussing. As we're back here again, sorry for the technical difficulties. Back live again on 12 Ounce Sports Network, presented by the Fields Golf Course and MyBookie, talking Major League Baseball. Seems like 2020 just does not want us to do anything, including doesn't want me to apparently do my show today. But it seems like every time things seem to get a little bit back to normal, like I was mentioning, having this weekend feel a little bit normal again with baseball being back, something has to come up, and it's the harsh reality that we live in now, and this disease and what's happening, and the idea that, we might have to stop if a team gets an outbreak like the Miami Marlins just had, or something back happens again. I really do hope that we can continue the season. I understand, again, going back to what David Price said with the tweet I read earlier in the show about how, Major League Baseball needs to start thinking about players' health first. I totally understand that. I don't play Major League Baseball, but I can understand if I was in that scenario, especially with a family. It would be awfully hard, especially if you're a player and you look at the news and you see half of a roster has tested positive, and I'm sure all you can really think about is your family, and you're not really thinking about the game. But man, I hope some way, somehow, we can find out, Major League Baseball can figure out a way to go back to playing and things can go on. Again, if you're just joining us, first of all, again, for the apologies for the technical difficulties, but if you're just joining us here on the JD Sports Show, I started off the top of the show talking about the Miami Marlins, who announced that they had around 15 players and staff test positive for COVID-19. And Major League Baseball is set to have an emergency meeting today, and the MLB and MLBPA, which is the Player Association, agreed upon a deal that would allow Rob Manfred, the Commissioner of Baseball, to cancel or suspend a season at any time if an outbreak occurred. And they are considering this an outbreak, so an emergency meeting is basically going to be, okay, are we going to suspend, cancel, or are we just going to are we going to play on? If I was to guess, and I don't really want to speculate too much because I really don't know what's going to happen. Part of me feels like, yeah, I think it's going to have to be suspended because, it's just not the Marlins, the Phillies who played them, and then, as I mentioned, the Yankees who now have to go to that clubhouse that the Marlins were just in. It's a real big ripple effect that happens. It's not just one team and you move on. It affects several different things. The other part of me goes, well, if the Phillies come back and they have very few or no positive tests because they played the Marlins, I think you can play on, because that would tell me that it was just an in-clubhouse breakout, which obviously you don't want to have happen, but it would then tell baseball and everybody else, okay, at least it was just something that was going through the clubhouse and it didn't affect the opposing team, which would be the Phillies who played them. But if the Phillies come back and they have half of their roster out too, then it's going to be almost impossible to continue the season, because then that's going to mean that if one roster gets an outbreak, the team that plays them is going to get an outbreak, and you're just going to cause a huge mess. So I think two things that we have to really be watching out for is the Phillies test. What do they come back as? How does that look? And the other thing is continuing to monitor the Marlins. Last night it was 4, and then I woke up this morning, it was 15. So it could be more than that. Hopefully not. And also, really quickly, I should have probably said this earlier. I hope everybody that tested positive in the Marlins roster. You hope the best for. Hopefully, most of them, don't have any to very mild symptoms, and hopefully they're able to all come back in a week or less than a week. Again, this is why baseball built the taxi squad, was so if several players went out, they could just boom bring up several members. Now, of course, a couple of players versus half of a roster. Now, two of them, I believe, I've read that two are staff. So you're talking about around 11 to 12 players have contracted it. So 3 or 4 players and 12 players is a big difference. I mean, that you're talking about a big chunk of the roster that you'd have to replace. And that's unfortunate for a team because, we're very early in the season, so it's kind of hard to say. But what if, and by the way, the Marlins are 2-1. They took 2 out of 3 from the Phillies. And now this. So they have momentum, and now you have to, and if you continue the season, now you're saying, okay, we're sorry, but you have to bring up 12 new guys. What if that happens to a team, let's say we're 35, 40 games in, and the New York Yankees are, well, maybe not the Yankees, because I think they may win the East. By the way, really quickly, the Baltimore Orioles and the New York Yankees have the same record of 2-1. Hey, just saying, on July 27th, 2020, the Baltimore Orioles and the New York Yankees have the same record. But let's say, I think the Central is going to be a tough AL Central. So let's say the Minnesota Twins were 35, 40 games in, right? And let's say that the Minnesota Twins have a 2-game lead over the Chicago White Sox. Okay? And all of a sudden, the Minnesota Twins have 13 players contract COVID-19, and we're almost to the end of the season, and the Chicago White Sox are suddenly just 2 games behind. Now that could completely change everything. Because that means that the Minnesota White Sox are right there, only 2 games back, and the Minnesota Twins, who are probably going to go on and win that division, are suddenly, boom. Everything falls apart. They lose half, some of those guys could be starting pitching, starting players. And suddenly everything for the Twins changes. These are things that, again, I mentioned on the show last week that I really, in the postseason, I talked about it. Like, what if this happens in the postseason and a team that's in the playoffs in a shortened best of 3 or best of 5, best of 7 loses half of its roster. It's a very scary thing to think about, very scary thing to talk about, because after you watch baseball and you're just feeling normal again ish, as normal as you can be, this hits and you go, oh my goodness, 2020 strikes again. We're back to this. JD Sports Show here on 12 Ounce Network, presented by MyBookie and the Fields Golf Course. Remember to visit thefieldsgolfcourse.com to book a tee time and to check for availabilities. We're talking about how Major League Baseball is having to undergo a reality check this morning and afternoon, after they've learned that the Miami Marlins had 13 or 14 players and coaching staff members test positive for COVID-19. All right, well, we don't know what's going to happen, right? Baseball is going to have this emergency meeting, and I'm still just waiting to try to hear anything, any sort of news from that, whether it be good or bad, just waiting to hear. Not sure it will break in this next hour. But if it does, I will make sure to bring it to you first. Remember to follow me over on Twitter at the JD Show 12 ounce and on Facebook, the JD Sports Show, to be notified when I go live, but also to find out any news that I hear and we can discuss it. Let's move forward to a lighter topic. Let's talk about the weekend that was baseball, which is how I wanted to open the show, but unfortunately 2020 and reality took over. So let's talk about the brighter side of things and how I and you all felt about the first 3 games of the 2020 Major League season, Major League Baseball season. Make sure to tweet at me at the JD Show 12 ounce or Facebook, the JD Sports Show, to tell me how you felt about the first weekend of Major League Baseball's 60-game season return. I felt pretty good. Like I said, it was really nice to just enjoy baseball again. It was obviously different, especially I think the first opening night with Washington and New York. I'd watched a couple inter-squad Detroit Tiger games, but it was just, that was kind of a fun mess around. But to watch a game that meant something and to really see those guys know that it meant something to compete, it was just so different with an empty stadium. It sounded different. It felt different. It's just, it felt that way. But, I think personally, after a few innings of play, after a few innings went through, I felt pretty good about it. I felt like, okay, this isn't as bad as I anticipated. I knew it's still a little weird looking into the crowd and you see cardboard cutouts or empty seats. But, I thought overall it wasn't too bad. I didn't mind it. I think I was just so focused again on having baseball again and watching the game itself and being able to see that again that I wasn't really focused on the fact that it was empty. One thing I actually did like is you can hear when a good hit, man, the crack of the bat is always it's loud in game, right, in a normal game, but with the empty crowd and the empty seats, man, it was really loud, and I actually really enjoyed it. I thought that was really cool. Another thing that I enjoy about it is you can kind of hear the players, and it kind of feels more natural, right? It kind of feels like you're back to watching high school or low-end college baseball, where you're hearing the dugouts cheer, you're hearing the players speak and what they're thinking. On Saturday, in the Cubs-Brewers game I was watching, a fight actually almost broke out. There was a lot of chattering. Javier Baez didn't appreciate almost being hit. He was running a couple of times, and he started to chat a little bit. And I really didn't know how it got provoked because he didn't really seem to be too upset. I mean, he was upset by that, but it didn't. And then he started to walk away, and suddenly he turns around, and the benches start to come out, and you're going, okay, what in the world happened? And they're speaking to David Ross, who's the manager of the Cubs now. And apparently something was said. And he goes, well, now that you can hear the dugouts, you can hear things you didn't hear before. So somehow, some way, and something that you would never have seen before, because it's so quiet, apparently Javier Baez heard something or saw something, whatever the case is. I think it was heard, or way it was sounded, from the Brewer dugout that he did not appreciate, and he didn't like it. It was so bad that, again, both dugouts came out. I don't think you can really do anything with COVID. Another funny thing that happened this past weekend in baseball, we saw the first ejection of a manager, which we knew was probably going to happen. I didn't know if it happened on the opening weekend, but it did. And it was just so funny because what happens? Well, the manager has to come out. He has to put his mask on, and then the umpire's digging his mask out of his pants. And apparently, under under the rules, if you're coming out to argue, you have to maintain social distancing. So he's arguing with this umpire with a mask on from 6 feet away. And it was just so funny to me. It's like, obviously, you understand why, and it's a good thing that they're mandating these kind of things. But it's going. If you would have told me a year ago that this picture that I'm looking at with an umpire and a manager arguing with mask over, sitting 6 feet away, was real and not a Photoshop, I would have laughed. But that's just what 2020 has been, and how wild everything has been. The fact that I'm watching an umpire and a manager argue about something with mask on, standing 6 feet away. That's how you got to argue now. If you want to argue, he already got thrown out before he argued, but that he came out to argue, and that's how you have to, unless you want. I think I believe what happens if you don't do that is you can get suspended. If you don't maintain social distancing and stuff when you come out to argue, you can get suspended. It's just it's crazy to me that all these kind of new things you're adapting, right? Watching this first week and you're seeing the empty stands, and then the fight situation where Javier Baez apparently heard somebody from the other dugout, which wouldn't have happened in previous years because the crowd noise would have affected that, the stadium noise. And then you're watching a manager and an umpire. I mean, just in 3 games, you saw how different the game is with the empty seats and the noise and the different rules. There's just so many different things that have had to been applied by baseball, Major League Baseball, because of everything happening. And it's just so interesting to watch because at the end of the day, it's still baseball, right? The game is still the same core game. But to have to watch these professionals have to kind of learn a different side of the game because of the way it has to be played now, it's so interesting to me because there's so many different things. Again, those 3 examples I just gave are just 3 little things. I mean, as hopefully, if this season goes on and as we continue to go through this shortened 60-game season, I think a lot of these players will learn to adapt to these different changes. But I'm sure there's always going to be something here or there every week where, well, this wouldn't happen if not for COVID. And it's just going to be those little things that are going to be interesting to see what happens, again, if we continue through this 60-game season, which hopefully we will. Again, Major League Baseball is set to have this emergency meeting today to discuss the Miami Marlins outbreak. If you're just joining or you haven't heard, around 14 Miami Marlin player and coaches tested positive for COVID-19. The Marlins and Orioles game and the Phillies-Yankees games have both been canceled tonight. Obviously, the Marlins and Orioles have been canceled for obvious reasons. The reason the Phillies and Yankees game has been canceled is because Miami was just in Philadelphia, so the Phillies have to make sure that they test positive. But also, the Marlins were in that visiting dugout. So that means that they have to completely just do a super deep clean on the visiting dugout before the Yankees go in it. So between waiting, and again, I think a big thing that I mentioned earlier that we're waiting on is what do the Phillies results come back like? If the Phillies results come back bad and they seem to have an outbreak, it could be a really bad news for baseball because it could mean the cancellation because that would symbolize that if one team gets an outbreak, it's likely that the team they're facing also gets that same outbreak. So we're really going to be waiting, of course, on what MLB announces from that emergency meeting. I wonder myself if Major League Baseball is kind of waiting on the Phillies test as well to kind of see how that worked out. I mean, if they come back to little to no, I mean, by little, I mean maybe 1 or 2 positives to no positives, I think that will be really good news for baseball. But if the Phillies come back and they have, 10 or so positive tests themselves, Major League Baseball season after just one weekend will be in serious jeopardy. And it already is. Regardless of what the Phillies do, it already is because one outbreak, again, as I've mentioned, Rob Manfred has the power, if an outbreak happens during the season, to cancel or suspend at any time. And that's what that meeting's going to be about. Do they suspend? Do they cancel? Do they keep going? It sounds like a majority, or I shouldn't say majority, but it does sound like players are getting pretty worried. I was reading some tweets. I just read that Jordy Mercer, who is a infielder for the Tigers, said he always had concern about COVID-19, but it just kind of amplifies when you hear the news like this, that an outbreak has happened. You get, so you got to believe that the players outside of Miami and Philadelphia who are listening and watching this news have got to be worried. Again, I mentioned this earlier. If I was in that position, if I was a player and I had a family, man, it's awfully tough. Uh, you know, you got to provide, right? You want to play because, one, you don't want to let your team down. You don't want to let your fans down. You don't want to let yourself down, maybe. But reality is reality. And family, and again, that's why we've had several big names, David Price, Buster Posey. Guys have sat out the season because of that. Buster Posey just adopted twins, so he said, I don't think that's best for me. David Price, as a young kid, he said no. A lot of other players had complimented him, and we even had Mike Trout, the best player in the game, at one point discuss how he was on the fence of playing baseball this year. So, will this amplify that? Could this, I think one thing I haven't discussed yet, but I think is interesting to think about, could this push players out? Could this news that we hear today, regardless, let's say MLB says, okay, we're going to carry on with the season, but could players drop out? What if you're a Miami Marlin player that tested positive? I mean, you may drop out of the season after this. So I think that's another thing we have to take into account, and something that we'll have to continue to keep our eyes on is, will this news today start a movement of another wave of players saying, okay, I'm going to sit out the season after that news. I feel like it's unsafe for me and my family to play the rest of the season. A lot of stuff, guys, a lot of stuff to really think about when you consider everything. I mean, and that's what Major League Baseball is having to go through right now as they get ready for that meeting and what they will have to discuss in that meeting. I mean, there are so many points to this discussion about canceling or resuming or suspending. And then if you do suspend, how long is a good suspension? Is it a couple days? Is it a week? And then what do you do with the season? Do you just move those games back, or do you just wipe them off the slate? Even though you only have 60 games, obviously this is not a position I'm sure Major League Baseball or any team or professional sport wanted to be put in. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm sure the National Football League is really watching this because they probably wanted to do something similar to what Major League Baseball is doing, to where they could still do travel, where travel was okay. But if this doesn't work out and NBA shows that the bubble can work, then maybe NFL is going to have to go to a bubble system. If I was to guess right now on this spot, here at 2:48 p.m. on the East Coast, here on the JD Sports Show, presented by MyBookie and the Fields Golf Course, if I was to sit here and predict what I think is going to happen, I believe the season will go on, but I do believe it will be suspended. I think they're going to suspend the season for, I think, maybe a week at most. Maybe they just want to do like 5 days or 7 days. I'm not sure. But I think if Rob Manfred wants the players to stay around and to believe that he truly does care about player safety and their health, he's got to put the season on hold for a little bit, because they've got to make sure that, again, the Phillies don't have an outbreak happen and that they can control this before it gets worse. I wouldn't be shocked, to be honest with you, if the season continues on like normal and they just canceled the 2 games that have already been canceled and we move on, because I do believe that that baseball has gotten so far. I feel like they're going to be probably really, I know this sounds terrible, but this might sound terrible, but I think they're going to be really stingy and picky about just suspending and canceling the season. And I just thinking from their perspective, they're already on a time crunch. They've already shortened the season. If they feel like it's under control or can get under control, they're going to continue the season as it is. I really do. I keep going back to this, but I really believe what happens with the Phillies test and how many they test positive is going to be very important to what happens the rest of the season. That's why they could be waiting for that before heading into the meeting. I believe, no doubt in my mind, if the Phillies come back and they have 10 or so tests, it's done. MLB season is over. Because, again, that proves that if one locker outbreaks, then the other side's going to get it just as bad. Season's over. But if the Phillies come back with very few or no tests at all, at worst, I think the season gets suspended. I think it's going to take... I don't think one locker room having an outbreak like this is going to cancel the season, but if it affects the other locker room, so in this case the Phillies, and they can show that if you get one outbreak over here, you're going to get it on the other side, then that's going to cancel the season. So I think it's going to be so paramount to what happens with the Philadelphia Phillies testing and what happens in those results to really what happens to the rest of the Major League Baseball 2020 60-game season. Again, please feel free to tweet me at the JD Show 12 ounce with your thoughts on everything I've talked about. Your thoughts on the season. Do you believe that the MLB should cancel the season? Do you believe that one outbreak should be enough to cancel or suspend it, or do you believe kind of what I think that that if both locker rooms get the outbreak, then yes. But if only one of them gets the outbreak, then I think you can continue to go it. Again, like I've said, I still believe deep down, regardless of what happens with the Phillies, I do believe the season will get suspended for some amount of time because I think Rob Manfred has to prove to the players that he does believe that there is big weight in player safety and player health. What David Price tweeted out, I think a lot of players are thinking, especially those who are actually decided to play. Does my commissioner care about the safety, or does he care more about just playing? So I think the only way that happens is, A, he either comes up with some sort of plan to continue the season, but then comes up with something that provides the safety of players, or B, he suspends it for a week. Going to be interesting. I wish news would have broke during our hour here on 12 Ounce Sports Network. I wish the news would have broke. I would have loved to discuss it some more. But we will just continue to have to wait as we creep up on 3 p.m. on the East Coast, end of our show. Hopefully we get some news within the next hour or two for Major League Baseball. We're just waiting on that emergency meeting. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the show from Bob Nightingale, the owners had a meeting today, and it didn't sound like the season was getting canceled, but that's from an owners. That doesn't necessarily mean the end-all, be-all, because at the end of the day, it's up to Rob Manfred. And again, they put in the stipulations that Rob Manfred at any point in the season can cancel or suspend the season if an outbreak occurs. This is an outbreak, so we will see if that, the reason they put that in there is for a case like this. That's why, again, I believe at the end of the day, the season's going to get suspended. Will it get canceled? I don't think so. If the Phillies come back with a lot of positives, maybe. But I think right now, suspension is the most likely case. Again, I'm thinking maybe it's got to be at least a few days, right? You've got to at least wait, suspend it for 5 days. I think probably most likely you're looking at a week. But we'll see. Only time will tell. And again, we should hear something from that MLB emergency meeting within the next couple of hours. So stick around. I'm sure all of my colleagues here on 12 Ounce Sports Network on the shows that will happen later on here today will have much discussion to talk about that news with you, so stick around. Remember to download the Zingo TV app. Use promo code 12ounce to get free access to live shows and past shows, including the JD Sports Show. Again, we want to thank the song Odyssey, which you heard in the intro and also will lead us out today. That's by Scorch featuring Austin Tenick. You can find that on SoundCloud. I want to thank our sponsors, MyBookie, and the newest sponsor to the JD Sports Show. A big shout out to the Fields Golf Course in Ithaca, Michigan. Make sure to visit their website, thefieldsgolfcourse.com, to book tee times and for future availabilities. What will happen? When we come back on the air next Monday, we'll be discussing the second weekend of Major League Baseball and the beginning of the National Basketball Association, the NBA, or will we be discussing the end of Major League Baseball and how that one weekend in July of 2020 will go down in infamy, the shortest MLB season, although 60 games is already going to be, but an even shorter season. 2020 is going to have, 10 years down the line when we get to the new decade, 2030, and we all look back. Hopefully, by the way, this is the worst of this decade, but there's going to be a lot of discussion in history books and sports books about how 2020 affected everything, and if we only get to play 3 Major League Baseball games this season, it will only add to the large encyclopedia thick book that has been 2020, and we're only just getting to the end of July. Hopefully things will turn around again. Hopefully Major League Baseball can figure something out. Hopefully the bubble system works for NBA. NASCAR's still going strong. Hopefully the National Football League will be able to figure something out so there's no delays in the NFL season. What's going to happen with college football, I think, is going to be dependent on what happens with colleges. If they go back, college football's got a chance. If they don't go back, it's going to be tough. Don't forget that on July 27th, the Detroit Tigers, are tied for first in the American League Central. They took 2 out of 3 from the Cincinnati Reds. They got struck out 13 times yesterday by Trevor Bauer and still won that game. What I learned this past weekend is the Tigers actually have bats this year that can hit in timely manners, and the Cincinnati Reds have a terrible bullpen. So I predicted the Reds to make the playoffs. I don't feel very strongly about that anymore because their bullpen is really bad, and they have good starting pitching. They had all 3 games. Their starting pitching was pretty good, but their bullpen is trouble. And that is not going to be good, especially, you look at past postseason teams and World Series champions, pitching and bullpen specifically has reigned supreme for world champions, so not a good look for the Cincinnati Reds. Thank you, everybody, for joining today here on the JD Sports Show. I really do appreciate it. Again, go follow me over on Twitter and like us on Facebook. Thank you to 12 Ounce Sports Network for continuing to provide this platform. Thank you to our sponsors, MyBookie and the Fields Golf Course. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. We'll see you again back here live next Monday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. Have a great night, everybody.
Go get it. Period.